What? We can always just answer the hotline here. Hello, you're on the horn.
Hey, it's Chris Murphy.
Chris Murphy goes in! We were thinking you were going to blow us off, and I was going to have to endorse Andrew Rohraback to take your seat.
I was thinking about it, but in the end, I didn't want to draw your ire, so I called in.
See, folks, that's how it works. Chris, it's great to talk to you again. Thank you so much for calling in. The seat that you are vacating right now, I guess the two front runners are Chris Donovan and Rohraback. But do you think do you like Donovan's chances?
I think Chris is a great candidate. He's done a great job with the state legislature. He's, just been an amazing advocate for, working families across the state. There are two other good Democrats in the race. Elizabeth Esty, who's a neighbor of mine in Cheshire, did a great job representing our town for 2 years. And then a young guy, Dan Roberti, who, people don't know as much about, but I hear is, making some good progress out across the state, has raised a lot of money. He's a strong candidate. So, I haven't gotten involved in the race. I think any of those three could win. Rohraback is, I'm not sure that he's a clear favorite. That's a crowded field. The Republican Party, frankly, in Connecticut has been taken over by some of the same interests that the National Republican Party have, the Tea Party, the real conservative government go-away types. And I think Rohraback will have some trouble with those folks in the end. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on their side as well.
I do not disagree, but only time will tell. But let's get to your campaign, and just for the listeners, the interviews that we do here are not gotcha interviews, and what we do is we walk through the platform that the candidates lay out, and then I do the everyman questions upon that. So these should be questions that Chris is very familiar with. So let's first talk about the economy. You mentioned, obviously, the economy has been, devastated for the last half decade or so. One might even say a full decade. You mentioned that while temporary assistance is vital, we must also focus on making sure that families' long-term investments, for many of them their homes, are protected. And this means getting reasonable mortgage rates and reasonable monthly payments. My question is, I'm not really sure that's the answer. A reasonable rate or reasonable monthly payment is not how we got into this mess. I think it's more of, why don't we make it mandatory that we have 20% down to buy a house, or you lose the ability to write off the interest on your mortgage?
Well, I think we got into it for a lot of different reasons. I don't think there's one particular reason, but we certainly had a lot of homeowners who got into variable rate mortgages with teaser rates up front that looked very attractive, with much higher rates that set in down the line that really affected their ability to repay. I will tell you that there are thousands of my constituents who can stay in their home if they get an adjustment on their mortgage, if they get a longer term or a more reasonable interest rate. So for lots of families, it is the terms of the mortgage that is stopping them from being able to repay it. And you can put the blame on a lot of different people, on the borrower for not reading the fine print, on the mortgage broker for not disclosing what was really happening 3 years down the line. But I do think a big part of the problem is the structure of these loans, and it's absolutely maddening from our standpoint when we're trying to work with our constituents to get these loans modified, that the banks won't talk to us. The banks won't talk to them.
Right.
From my point of view, it's in both their interest and the borrower's interest to try to find the modification that works. Now, you're right as well that there were a lot of people who should have never gotten a mortgage in the first place. And the loose lending requirements that either didn't require you to put money down or didn't even look at what your income truly was part of the problem here. And so, I'm a general believer that there is no simple solution to complex problems. And the housing crisis in this country has a multi-systemic reason for existing. It has a multi-systemic solution, and I think it's both on modifying existing mortgages and doing what you're talking about, tightening up borrowing requirements in the first place.
It's certainly a fair point. It's a multifaceted problem. I'm wondering about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Do you think that these two institutions have kind of run their course now. They essentially created a market for these bad investments. And so the private mortgage companies and banks said, okay, well, if Fannie and Freddie are going to back us on this and help insure our risk against the homeowner defaulting on this loan, then we'll go ahead and do these loans. Do you think we're beyond the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac backstop now?
No, absolutely not. I think Fannie and Freddie are vital pieces of our housing economy. Without Fannie and Freddie, you essentially wouldn't have something like a 30-year mortgage on the market. The question is not whether you need a federal insurance function for housing. It's what products are they going to insure. And they certainly were culpable of underwriting a series of mortgages that shouldn't have been underwritten. They were not alone in going above and beyond the call of normal underwriting standards, but the solution isn't to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not to get rid of Fannie and Freddie. They're an important part of lending liquidity to our mortgage market, and any Main Street bank will tell you they would stop making mortgages, essentially, of the variety they give now if Fannie and Freddie disappeared. I just think that you have to tighten up their standards for what kind of mortgages they end up insuring.
Okay. You're very interested in getting manufacturing back to the United States. Well, why do you think we've lost manufacturing? You mentioned that the decline has been 40% since World War II. What happened?
Well, what happened is that the increase in needs of communication and transportation allowed for a worldwide market for manufacturing to develop, and the fact is that there were other countries that could dramatically undercut the United States on price, especially for the high volume, low value added products. And so what you've seen is low precision manufacturing leave the United States, not entirely, but almost entirely. And the question is, what is the future of American manufacturing? It is not inevitable that manufacturing is going to leave. We just have to reorient ourselves to try to capture the higher value added, higher complexity, high precision manufacturing that is coming back to this country. We've lost a tremendous amount of our manufacturing base in this country. We still make more things than any other country in the world, and in the last year we've added almost 200,000 manufacturing jobs back to those that we lost. So manufacturing is coming back, but it's a different kind of manufacturing than we used to do. The stuff that was done in the big, huge factories of New Britain and Waterbury, that's not coming back, but something else can.
We're talking to Congressman Chris Murphy on the phone, the hotline here, sponsored by Deepwater Seafood and the accounting firm of Budowitz and Meyerjack. Healthcare, you have a pretty interesting opinion on healthcare. You believe, quote, healthcare coverage should be a right, not a privilege, available only to those who can afford it. I have thought that this universal health care, or whatever it is, the only argument that really could last is make this like protection from foreign enemies. Make that a right, that the federal government needs to take this over because it is such an important issue, and it seems that you're taking that same task. What's the holdup on that? Why do people disagree?
Well, I think that there's really a difference between Republicans and Democrats on this, in the sense that most Republicans view healthcare like we view education. I think, to me, that's the better comparison. We view education, even though it's not a constitutional right, as a basic right that you get as a citizen of this country. We've made a commitment to educate every kid up to a certain point. And I think that we should look at healthcare just like we look at education. You're going to get a basic healthcare benefit if you're a citizen of the United States, just like you're going to get an education. Republicans look at it as a business, as a commodity. They think that the healthcare system is a place where you can make your fortune. It's a place to win and lose investments, and that it really shouldn't be looked at as something that is at the foundation of a successful life in a successful country. So I just think that healthcare and healthcare economy should be treated differently than other economies. I think when life and death is at stake, it's very different than when just profit or loss is at stake. And I think that that's what comes down to the essential distinction between the two parties on this issue.
You have mentioned on your website that you have worked very hard for health care for the people of Connecticut. That was an interesting phrase for me to read, that you were working for health care on behalf of the people of Connecticut. Do you think that health care should be a state-by-state issue and not a federal issue?
Well, no, I mean, my primary responsibility is to represent the constituents of my state and of my district, so I guess I frame all the things I work on in terms of sticking up for the people that I represent. But, I was the chair of the health committee in the state legislature. I was working really hard on trying to increase coverage at the state level and try to bring some more justice to our healthcare system through state reform. I ran for Congress in part because I ended up hitting a brick wall in trying to solve our state's healthcare crisis through state change. Ultimately, healthcare is mostly federal law. And I ran against Nancy Johnson, a race that most people thought I was silly to engage in large part because, Connecticut's healthcare problems weren't going to be solved unless we had federal healthcare reform that guaranteed healthcare for all American citizens, including all Connecticut citizens.
Our next question has to do with something that absolutely baffles me, and I have no understanding of how to solve it because it just doesn't seem to work. Money in education, getting better results either from our teachers or from our students or from the parents of those students. Money appears not to be solving it. Otherwise, Washington, D.C. would have the greatest public schools in the nation. What do we do? I'm baffled. What do we do to increase education?
Well, I mean, we could talk about that for an hour, right?
Yeah.
There's again no simple solution here, but money is part of the equation here. It's not the entire solution, but certainly when you go around my district and you see 32 kids per class in some first grade and second grade classrooms in New Britain, Connecticut, that's a money issue. New Britain doesn't have the money to reduce those class sizes. It doesn't have the money to put a paraprofessional in to help the kids with severe autism who should be getting specialized help. It's an absolute travesty what's happening in some cities in this state where kids are getting absolutely no individualized attention and are being packed into classrooms like sardines. That's a money issue in the end, but there are plenty of other things that can be solved that aren't money issues. Trying to encourage more really high-quality individuals to go into teaching. We know that every study tells us that the best thing for a kid is a great teacher. We need to be encouraging more top students coming out of our colleges to go into teaching. And in our state, we need to sort of settle the question of how we fund education. It makes absolutely no sense to simply require all of our cities to fund their schools and all of our suburbs to fund their schools. We've got to have a better way of sort of spreading out the burden of paying for education. Parents are a big piece of this, and if we get more parents' jobs, if we grow healthier families, if we teach better parenting skills up front to teen mothers, for instance, we're going to help the education problem down the line. But it's again a very complicated problem with a lot of different solutions.
Talking to Congressman Chris Murphy, you say women's health and equalities is also something that is paramount to your running for U.S. Senate. And you also mentioned that the right to choose is under attack. I assume you mean Roe v. Wade. Who is it under attack by? Who's attacking it?
Well, Republicans in the House of Representatives primarily. I've been a member of the House during this last term. There's really not a month that goes by without a different piece of legislation on the floor that's seeking to restrict a woman's right to choose, trying to deny funding to a lot of the organizations that provide reproductive health care services like Planned Parenthood to women across this country. The Republicans have made it pretty clear that not only do they oppose abortion being available to a woman that chooses that option, but they also don't even want basic family planning services like contraception available to women who want to choose to use contraception, despite the fact that 99% of women do. So what we're fighting here in Washington is not just a fight over whether or not women are going to have the ability to choose what to do with their own bodies, but whether or not women are still going to have access to birth control. We thought that issue was settled 50 years ago, but right now we're back to fighting what we thought was a settled question over family planning services.
This next line I have to read directly from your website because it sums up what I think every American agrees with, and I can't figure out where the opposition is. LGBT rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered rights. Let me be clear and simple. LGBT rights are human rights. Marriage equality and non-discrimination in military, workplace, classroom, and healthcare systems based on real or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, are civil rights that must be protected under law. I understand that getting my hands around the opposition opinion is probably the best way to combat their arguments and convince people not only just that you're right, but actually get them to buy in. Who on the planet does not agree that LGBT rights are human rights? You say it is not the government's place to tell Americans who they can and cannot love. Chris, that is a core conservative value. Who are the Republicans? Name them for me, and I'll help you. Who are the conservatives out there who disagree with that?
Well, it is basically a litmus test to be a Republican in Congress or a Republican presidential candidate to deny that very fact, that the rights of people based on their sexual orientation are civil rights. And so I frankly do want to if you want me to introduce you to a Republican that doesn't believe that LGBT rights are civil rights, I will introduce you to any member of the House of Representatives today in Washington, because almost to a person, they don't believe that we should treat sexual orientation the same way we treat religion and race and ethnicity when it comes to protections of the law in this country. There's Republicans just believe that sexual orientation is a choice, that it is morally wrong, and they don't think that the law should respect the rights of people who are gay or lesbian. I just fundamentally disagree. I fought my entire life to try to make sure that people who are gay or lesbian are treated exactly the same as everyone else. We're getting closer to that day. We've certainly made the right steps in Connecticut, but in Washington, we are fighting, a homophobic agenda, and there's nothing, there's nothing more to say about it. We're fighting people who don't like gays and lesbians and don't want the law to protect them, and it's really sad that we're continuing this battle, but it's real in Washington, even if it's increasingly settled in states like Connecticut.
Well, if you want a army of Republican conservatives to back you on that issue, let me know, and I'll gather the troops together for you, because it makes no sense to me. That's saying you're less of a human, and I think
from a conservative standpoint, you're exactly right. I mean, conservatives historically have believed that the government should stay out of individuals' private business. And they seemingly have reserved an exception for this issue of what you do in your bedroom, whether it's to take birth control or whether it's who you choose to love. I don't get it, because I think if you are a true conservative, that you would really sort of recoil at the idea of the government getting involved in those kind of personal decisions.
I agree. I don't know what else to tell you. I agree. The next topic is energy, by the way. We're talking to Congressman Chris Murphy, running for Senate, current congressman in the 5th District of Connecticut. This is a topic that I've done probably far too much research on for the 3 minutes that we're going to spend on it. But I don't even know where to begin here. Here are just some facts. We have approximately, in natural gas, we use per year 19 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. In our country, we have an estimated 1.4 quadrillion, that's beyond trillion, 1.4 quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas right here in this country. That's centuries of natural gas that we can use for energy. Where does it? This comes from the Energy Information Administration. We also have oil here. We spend about 100 million barrels a day, and we have 500 quadrillion BTUs of oil right here in the United States. Dr. Peter McCabe is the guy from the Department of Energy who put together this little slide for us. We have centuries of natural resources. Centuries. Why don't we just cut out the Middle East now? And I'm sure 400-500 years from now, we'll have figured out an alternative energy. But why? It seems like we're trying to find the solution before there's really a need, and just a bunch of hype about we're running out of oil, we're running out of natural gas. We're not. We got centuries of it right here in the United States.
Well, let me answer that question. Just by the way, I do have to run to get on another phone call here for a second. But so I think there's truth and fiction to that in my mind. It is not true that we can divorce ourselves from foreign oil simply by tapping our own gas and oil alone, in large part because much of that is very hard to get to. And though we can do an enormous amount more with natural gas, I'm a big believer in trying to do everything we can to tap America's natural gas potential. We have realized that there are increasingly problems in getting to it. It becomes much more expensive to get, and there are some environmental problems involved in how we're getting it. With respect to oil, we do have more oil in this country and offshore, but we have only about 2% of the world's oil reserves, and we continue to use about 25% of the world's oil. So even if you got every last drop in this country, we're not going to come close to what we currently need as a country in terms of oil needs. The real wins are not in terms of getting us off of foreign oil, does not necessarily lie in tapping different domestic sources. It's in using less. We listen to Vice President Cheney tell us that conservation was a virtue, not a policy. That's absolutely wrong. The quickest way to get us off of foreign oil is to implement policies and incentives in this country for people to use less energy. And there are a million different ways that you can do that, and a million different policies to try to incentivize that. But though gas, I think, more so than oil, is a big part of our future, I totally agree with you on that. We should first be talking about conservation.
I agree. I'll let you go. Final word on, do you think we can increase our nuclear capacity for energy?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it as well. There's definitely this question of disposal of nuclear waste that has to be settled before you can really build out nuclear capacity in this country. But that shouldn't be as hard as it is. And I do see a day 20 years down the line when we can have a domestic energy mix that is based on renewables. But that's 20 years down the road, and we need to solve this problem today. And that's why gas and nuclear are really important parts of, both a permanent mix in this country, but also a bridge to a moment in which we can really commercialize and get price parity for things like solar and wind and geothermal. So nuclear is definitely on the list.
He is Congressman Chris Murphy from the 5th District, running for Senate. If you like what you hear, give him your vote. Chris, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
All right, we're going to take a quick little break, and we'll be right back for the pundits.
Budwitz and Meyerjack PC is a large Connecticut-based CPA firm with offices in Cheshire and Farmington, Connecticut. Large enough to handle engagements of enterprises with annual revenues in excess of $100 million, yet small enough to cater to smaller businesses and individual clients who expect personalized attention from partners and staff. Client service is the cornerstone of our practice. Our clients have a fixed fee for their audit and tax work. What this means to the client is we're approachable. Personal communication and client services make for strong relationships. Budwitz and Meyerjack, certified public accountants.
Central CT Dental, Doctors Camp Sandbor and Lupini for serious issues or just routine checkups. If it has to be done right, give them a call. If you just can't wait, give them a call. Very easy to get to. On the Plainville-Farmington line, call them at 860-747-5661 or make an appointment online at centralctdental.com.